I think that is the misconception of when product or senior leaders think we can solve all of this in the product or in the app. I think you can solve a lot of it, but I don't think you can solve all of it, and it requires a lot of work.
Welcome to Onboarding Therapy. I'm Kim, and in this episode, Sherelle and I are talking about the balance between human-led and in-app onboarding. We'll explore the benefits of both approaches and strategies for combining them effectively. Let's get into it. On our last episode, we talked about getting leadership buy-in for onboarding teams, and one thing that came up very briefly, but is a hot topic in onboarding, is when leadership or product teams are convinced that there is no need for humans in onboarding or an onboarding team because they believe they can build a product that is so intuitive that they don't need to be guided by a human, or there doesn't need to be a human kind of tracking or monitoring the process. So I think you probably have a ton to say about that, Sherelle, if you want to get started.
So I hear this a lot. I hear this from our own customers, even at times of, we're actually just doing this onboarding program, and eventually we're working our way towards doing this all in app, and it's going to be great and streamlined. I think there's some truth to that. I think you should start with human onboarding and learn from it, and then scale that to maybe like more strategic, what we consider one-to-many onboarding, things like live and or pre-recorded webinars, things like motions where you can reach more than one person at a time. I think a really good onboarding program also does incorporate in-app onboarding, whether you're using tools like Pendo or Intercom or AppQueue or stuff that you're building in-house into your product. The challenge in my mind with the statement that in-app onboarding in and of itself is going to solve all of your onboarding problems, or even activation problems or churn problems, however you want to call them, is the fact that we are talking about adult learning, and adults learn differently. People learn differently. So everyone might not actually be inclined to click through a bunch of pop-ups in your app, or let's take it a step even further. Everyone might not get the design vision you had or the intuitiveness of your design. And I think actually a really good onboarding program has all three of those pathways, ways where a customer, depending on the customer type or spend, can get one-to-one service or enterprise type of onboarding or white glove, whatever you call it. The option to be able to do some stuff on your own via learning centers or learning management systems or onboarding programs, and some in-app pieces. Now, I think everyone should strive towards making their app so intuitive and so well designed. I hope that that's the case, and that's what everyone's striving for, and that's what you should be building towards. I think the reality is that you're still going to always see churn in some way, or lack of activation, or lack of people getting everything or clicking into everything or using every feature, because people just think differently and people learn differently and people learn in different ways. So where I've seen it work actually really well is where there is a combination of those pathways and they're all still driving towards the same thing. And this is why I think, and I love in-app onboarding, don't get me wrong, like I wish everyone did some degree of it and had some pop-ups and some modules and some instructions today. And on paper, that sounds good. The first place it usually tends to break down with people that have that mentality is when it comes to actually do it, you have to start changing the look and feel of the app or the design of things. And now there's potentially video pop-ups or cues or notifications telling you to do something, or those stupid little tours that we all see pop up that in a sea of buttons and things you can click on and pages you can end up in, there's this one thing that says, click here to learn how to run this report. Like, sure, I can do that, but is that going to make me actually activated on this whole thing? Is that going to help me actually retain all of this thing? Probably not. Plus, it also only works when it is so targeted and specific to my needs that I can see that thing or pop up, or even just the design of it, and think, oh yeah, that ties to my goals. I'm here to spend, right? Like, you're relying so much on me to basically activate myself, which if that's my learning style and that's my personality, great, maybe you have a little bit of a chance. But to think that that is going to be your end all be all solution, maybe I'm biased. I don't think that's possible. And of all the customers that have told me that, it's been a few years. None of them have stopped using the onboarding software we have or dissolved their teams. Not all of a sudden have their activation metrics skyrocketed. So I don't know. I'm not a designer or a product engineer, so I can't judge too strictly or too heavily on the hopefulness or the wish that that will happen. In reality, I've never seen it play out that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As
Even
we
the like most well-built product-led type of growth companies and functions, like even certain components of them still require something beyond just me looking at the UI and figuring it out on my own.
Yeah, I completely agree. Definitely not a hater to in-app onboarding. In fact, I love it. I think it's great and everyone should strive for it. The
Yeah.
problem is when leadership, or I've seen it where like CTOs, like that kind of level, the engineering side is like basically saying, don't invest more in high touch onboarding or don't invest more in onboarding tools because we can build that. I think engineers and product teams feel almost like, we should ask. I wonder if they feel insulted that their product is not so intuitive that their customers need someone to walk them through using it. I wonder if that's part of where it comes from. Because that's been my experience too, where it's like, yeah, the ideal is to make this so intuitive that you don't need me to do training calls with most of our customers, or you don't need me to do multiple onboarding calls to show them how to do XYZ. But yeah, you're right. Like it's been 3 years and nothing, not even one improvement has been made to those things. And so the reality is you just need some help until you get to this magical place that you believe you're going to be.
And fine, rip out onboarding. All you're going to do then is overwhelm support with tickets, and those questions are still going to get asked no matter what. So absolutely strive for the in-app world. I actually think when done really well, those work in collaboration with each other. You should be figuring out things in one-to-one human onboarding and then conveying that to your marketing team so that they can figure out how to scale it. And then conveying that to your product teams and saying, actually, this feature is the one that we get hung up on the most. Can you make it more intuitive? Because in an ideal state, to what you said, I would love if every app fully onboarded itself, and then me in the success world could spend my time on more strategic conversations and more why you should think about it this way and less how to set it up. I've been doing this for 13 years. Waiting for that day to come where I don't have to answer questions and people just onboard themselves and I can just sit here and tally up all the revenue that we're saving. It's wishful thinking, not in a negative way of like, it's wishful thinking you can't do it. You should wish that way. You should strive towards that. You should figure out what's working in one-to-one and one-to-many and try to incorporate that in your app. And I think the reality just boils back down to people are going to want to learn differently. They're going to want to have different pathways. They're going to want to have different options. The same person might like 3 different pathways. And we used to have data on this. Like I would have customers show up to their first kickoff call and then say, yeah, this is all right. I don't need to do the next 2. And then they would randomly appear in some sort of webinars. And then I would notice in the in-app tracking system that they actually weren't activating certain features and so on. The key, I think, is that all those things should be driving towards the same output, which at the end of the day is customer goals. It's one thing to get how to use it. You have to also then be able to correlate that back to the thing you're paying for, or the value you signed up for, or the goals you're trying to achieve. And that has to happen very quickly in that split moment of time where I'm looking at the thing or clicking on the thing, or now I maybe didn't activate it. I have found that most of those in-app tours or guides or even well-designed things are really driving towards feature usage, which is good. You're driving usage up, you're driving activation, you're driving sessions and those bits. But are you actually hitting customers' goals, achieving their goals, and helping them solve for their pains that they came to you in the first place for? And if not, it, again, to me, doesn't feel like a well-designed tool in and of itself is going to just solve for that or just unlock that. At least not across enough of your customer base to feel confident saying, yeah, we're ripping apart everything else. I'm going to rely purely on product and design to do this.
Yeah. It reminds me of like founders saying that they want their logo to be like Nike, where people just know the swoosh without knowing the brand name. And it's like, well, Nike didn't do that overnight. Like that is an aspiration that you should not even try for. Like that's just unrealistic for most companies, most tech companies. That's not going to happen. I feel like it's the same kind of thing where if you Google online, like apps that have the best onboarding, you're always going to see Slack, for example. And it's the same thing where it's like everyone wants their product to be as intuitive or as easily adoptable as Slack. And it's like, great, you should definitely take notes from Slack. That's amazing. And your app is not going to be as intuitive or as easily adoptable as Slack for a very, very long time. And you need to plan and put your resources toward a plan that does not include or rely on you being Slack?
I love the Slack example because most people point to that and they say, well, Slack does it. Well, first of all, Slack has billions of dollars and a lot of powerful teams working behind that function. And the part of Slack that is, there's many parts of it, but the main part that people compare it to is like, well, yeah, Kim signed up for Slack and she loved it. And now Sherelle on her team also signed up for Slack. Look at that, double the growth and 2 users using it and they activated each other. Yes, true. That is one of their growth models. But there are so many businesses within Slack, things like the integrations, things like all of the setup and advanced ways that Slack talks to thousands of other tools, all of the like other things you can layer on top of it. And most of those aren't like self-guided, self-sign up, do your own thing. You have to talk to somebody. You got to do demos. You have to sign up for different tiers of product. And that's, again, why I think like, yeah, really good brands and really good products do have really good design and a chance for me to do it myself and grow myself and learn myself to a degree. If you have one product and that's all it is and it's super intuitive, great, have at it. But once you start layering in anything complex, anything with reporting, anything with strategy involved, and then the other thing, now that you've really got me riled up on this topic, this has also happened to me a couple of times where it's like, okay, fine, go build it. Like, build the crap out of it, design it. And I would love to not talk about this because it's eating up my time and my energy. You have to also then maintain that and keep up with it and hear feedback on that specific feature over and over and over again. Like, where is that going to happen? Where are you going to field that information? How are you going to capture those bits? And then how are you going to act on them? And are you going to update them and change them and keep them current? And so that is where sometimes it is a little easier when you have this working in conjunction to say, all right, Kim, I'm going to go test this thing for the next 10 customers. It worked. Great. Product, please help me make this more intuitive. Please, I would love to not talk about this again and again and again. So I don't know. It's a great aspiration to have. I think everyone should strive towards making their application more intuitive, better designed. I would be pleasantly surprised if I learned of a company that did it so well that all of a sudden they were able to remove all of their onboarding teams and support teams and all those questions that come during those early activation moments and had churn rates figured out. And all those customers are also, because it's not just like the churn piece, you also have to keep these customers around and keep them growing and keep them expanding. And it's just harder to do all of that in-app on my own without any help or support in those early days.
I think
we should get some engineers on this call. I mean, like, hey.
And hear what they think. No, I think I think the moral of the story is we're all on board to make the product more intuitive. It actually makes onboarding so much easier. It's just not ever going to replace people. I mean, never say never. Who knows with everything happening right now. But for a long time, you can't rely on your product being so easy to adopt that you don't need someone tracking and managing onboarding. And
Yeah.
I will say at Arrows, we talk to onboarding teams all the time on the sales side specifically. And sometimes people will say, okay, we love Arrows, but actually we just decided to do all of this in-app. So our product team is going to build out an onboarding flow in-app. And almost always a year later, they come back to us and they say, well, either we never did it because it can't be prioritized because you have a million other things to prioritize from a product perspective, or you built all of that stuff in app and you still have an onboarding problem because it didn't really address the problem that you had. And you actually just like need a better process. And I think that it's just like such a problem when that is the only solution to people. It's just almost impossible to have that be the only solution to onboarding.
Again, I said, introduce me to that company. I mean, that sounds great. If they have that all figured out and everything's working in app, like sign me up.
Yeah.
I mean, I like how you paused on it's not going to replace humans because with AI and everything we're seeing, maybe. You know, it's more expensive than a few onboarding people is a few engineers to maintain all of those changes and updates and so on. And again, to do it well, you have to make so many design changes in an app and often introduce things that weren't there before that could actually be more of a distraction. And there could be pop-ups and there could be like modules popping up. And how often are people actually clicking into those things unless they're so well programmed? And it's possible, but again, you need engineers and you need data and you need all sorts of setup and operations to manage it. It's not impossible to do. It's going to suck so much money and effort and energy from everything else that you're not going to see the results you want. You're going to likely spend a lot of effort doing it. And I'm not going to say you're going to be back in the same place because things might be different, but your odds are you're going to have similar activation and churn problems or different activation and churn problems.
Yeah, definitely agree. Any final thoughts on this?
Like I said, I think it's great.
Yeah.
I don't want the takeaway to be don't strive for better in-app design or onboarding or intuitiveness or whatever you want to call it, combination of all those things. Try to learn from one-to-one onboarding and incorporate, if that is your goal, at least start with some human and some component of it involved, and then take lessons out of that and build on that, and then figure out some sort of one-to-many strategy and some sort of in-app strategy. I think eventually you're going to run into, as you try to get more upstream and enterprise type of customers, some of that they just want handed-on support. They don't care how great your tool is or how great your design is. They will sign just knowing there is somebody to support them on that front, even if they don't necessarily need it or take that time from that person. So have at it, strive for it, build it, do it in conjunction with your teams. If you think it's going to solve all of your onboarding and activation problems, you and I don't think so. Most of the customers we've talked to don't think so and continue to prove that that's not the case. And we've both done onboarding at multiple different companies and in different verticals and in different sizes of spaces of companies. And we've both had onboarding jobs throughout them. And we've grown teams and added headcount. And I think that the goal could be don't add more headcount. Maybe what can we do with this group of people? Can we get strategic with this 2 folks instead of adding more? And how do we stretch this to its capacity? Make your teams more efficient, make those people more efficient.
Totally. Well, that's what I was going to say too, is when I was running onboarding, I was advocating for putting more stuff into the app to make it easier. Like you were saying earlier, like that's actually an onboarding team's dream. Like we want you to take away the parts where we are just explaining how to use features. That's actually not the value of onboarding. So that's great. Go put a guide to how to use specific features in your app. Amazing. Love it. On board. But there's just that's not all onboarding is. And in fact, if that's the way that you're viewing onboarding as just like a guide to show different features, then you're underutilizing your onboarding team and just thinking about it the wrong way. Ideally, actually, your product is intuitive enough that your customers can understand it. And then the onboarding specialist is kind of like a intro to customer success, being strategic, telling them how to do certain things in the app in a more strategic way rather than like click this button, then click this button. It's like, okay, here's the thing that you need to do right now. I'm going to give you kind of our playbook or the way what we recommend setting this up so that they're actually set up for more success rather than just clicking buttons on an onboarding or kickoff call.
And if you're really adamant, hire a dedicated engineer and a dedicated designer and have them talk to customers and at least like understand the goals and the space. And because just like any function, but human onboarding included, there's has to be revisions and optimizations of all that stuff, and things are going to change and features are going to change and goals are going to change and design's going to change, and all of that has to be accounted for. Like the second you create some sort of in-app module, it's outdated. So after that, if anything changes, that has to be kept up to date. Depending on when you present those things to a customer, might not be the right time or the wrong time. So you run the risk of losing value. And like you said, not only have I advocated for it, I've worked with teams building in-app onboarding for my programs, and I love it. Like let's drive towards the same goals. Like I would much rather your product design solve that answer for a question than have anyone on my team spend 10 minutes describing it in a call. Like that's not a good use of time. I 100% agree. But there's only so much that can do. So pick and choose where it makes sense. Pick the parts of the app or the parts of the process that get the most questions or the most feedback in support, in success, in onboarding, and chip away at those and see if you can reduce all that. And again, this goes back to a conversation we had last week, where if you actually have goals and targets that you're measuring and tracking towards that, yes, this is great. Now we can break it down even further. One-to-one onboarding, here are the results. Human-led onboarding, here are the results. In-app onboarding, here are the results. But it was great because we were partnering on it. We're working toward the same thing. New features launched. You advertise this in-app, we'll talk about it in a webinar, and I'll make sure every onboarding rep touches on this. And now we can actually measure activation across all these pathways and say, all right, we all focused on this collectively. here are the results. But any of those individual pathways are only as good as the people's willingness to learn in that style, plus discovering it. And so that's the other piece of it. Like, if you have one simple app, one page, a few clicks, great, it's discoverable. Most tools don't work that way. There's depths of clicks you have to click into. And also, not everything should have a pop-up or a video or a module appearing in the app. And I think that now, as we talk about this more, I think the misconception is that if you do it in an app, it's like one and done. And we'll do it one time and we'll design it one time and this is going to work forever.
Yep.
I think that is the misconception of when product or senior leaders think we can solve all of this in the product or in the app. I think you can solve a lot of it, but I don't think you can solve all of it. And it requires a lot of work to maintain.
Yeah, it's not just going to be a thing that you turn on and it's magic. And so you can't depend on that as a leader to hit
The same
whatever
thing as
magic.
in my world. If we run one template in our onboarding process, that doesn't mean all of a sudden it's the best one. We have to fix it and optimize it. I move stuff around all the time in our process because of that, because I'm learning in real time and I'm learning from our teams. So yeah, maybe that's the takeaway. It's not a set it and forget it type of thing.
Yeah. Well, this one turned into a little bit more of a rant than a real solutions, but sometimes that's needed. And we needed that, I guess. And probably other people did too.